In the past, you may have been told to put a comma every time that you take a breath. Instead, put a comma before concluding stuff to add emphasis to these extra details. Concluding stuff might include a word, phrase, or even a clause. Let's look at a couple examples. Remember that a sentence needs two things to be complete, a subject and a verb. A verb is an action word. In this case, it's gave. She gave the puppy the best name she could muster up. And then we ask of the verb, who gave? And in this case, it's she. Subject and verb. She gave the puppy the best name she could muster up. To make this sentence more detailed and interesting, we might add a concluding word like Hudson, because we all want to know the best name she could muster up, right? The comma emphasizes the concluding stuff. In the example I've just given, though, the comma feels pretty weak and even confusing. It almost sounds like I'm addressing my sentence to a person called Hudson. So to make things clearer and to add a bit of style, I'm going to consider upgrading my punctuation. Forget the comma. The colon creates a nice pause and ta-da moment. The em dash is even more dramatic. You can choose what effect you're going for. A good test for this is to use the word namely in place of the punctuation to see if things still make sense. She gave the puppy the best name she could muster up, namely Hudson. It's a bit awkward since we don't use that word namely very often, but it works. Since my single word ending with a comma example was kind of broken, let's look at another example of that before we move on. To is a word we might wish to emphasize at the end of a sentence, as in, her husband wanted to name the puppy Hudson too. Can you hear it? Moving on. Instead of a simple word, we might wish to add a phrase to the end of our sentence. ING phrases are commonly used as concluding stuff in this way and work well when cued by a comma. She gave the puppy the name Hudson, meaning son of Hugh or hug. Lastly, we might see a clause added to the end of a sentence. Which clauses are commonly used as concluding stuff in this way and work well when cued by a comma. She gave the puppy the best name she could muster up, which was Hudson. Remember that if the clause is dependent, that is, if it starts with a novoibus word, after, as, while, when, although, because, if, since, you do not need the comma when you're putting the clause at the end of the sentence. See the intro commas video for review. Here's one last thing to consider before we finish up. Before you get all comma happy, putting commas before concluding stuff in your writing, check to see if that concluding stuff might actually be a new sentence. If it is, a comma, colon, or em dash might actually create a form of run-on sentence. So you'd be better off using a period or some other creative solution. You can find out about those creative solutions by reading a bit about correcting comma splices elsewhere, but more on that later. In summary, and if you are taking notes, here are some little shorthand things that you can write down to help you remember this comma rule. Subject plus verb, comma, concluding stuff, period. The rest of the shorthand will help you to recall the upgraded punctuation and whatnot. You can look at more examples on my website next to this video. Have fun experimenting.